Now, there's a very famous phrase which goes like this: do not trust me, I'm a liar. You see, if that's true, is that statement now true or not? If you say I'm a liar, is that also a falsehood? That's the kind of dilemma, a circular dilemma. So, of course, the Indian national motto is taken from the Mundaka Upanishad, Satyameva Jayati, truth alone triumphs. Now, if you rely on that, you won't be much concerned, I suppose, with what is true, what is not, because it will come out eventually. There's no other way. But one thing we have to revalue about, and that is putting ourselves in a space as an individual, with an individual body, individual mind, because from a better point of view, the individual body, so-called, is just matter changing its form. Because its form, it came from whatever you ate previously. And so the miracle really is how you can take organic stuff and put it into an entrance here. Magically, it gets all manufactured into many different kinds of cells with different functions. So, two lessons we can learn from it. The first lesson is the body is just made from food. Annamaya kosha is the expression from the Taittiriya Upanishad. There's several layers there, and food is there, and the subtle portion of it comes out as the capacity to think. In other words, the subtleties of the brain, which is also instrumental. It's made from food. It can be tested if you fast for a number of days, and then you learn a few facts and figures before that. You read the Encyclopedia Britannica and catch a lot of facts and so on and so forth. Then after fasting, you're asked, please repeat that, and you'll find it's difficult because the brain is not functioning well. And also not only the brain, but the mind. What's the difference? So we have to clarify some terms. When we say mind in an individual context, we're talking of accumulated individual experiences, but actually the true mind, when it comes to the true buddhi, this we call cosmologically Mahat. We call it the grade one. So really, there's only one cosmic mind, just as there's only one broadcasting station, but many, many radio receivers. And the identical thing that is broadcast is received simultaneously. We don't have to catch it from anywhere, and the individual transistor that is called a radio has no independence. Its job is just as a tuning mechanism, and behind it, somebody willing to do the tuning. We tune into a certain wavelength, certain frequency, and we get a certain broadcast. But the broadcast waves are always here. The grace of the OTE, or whatever your broadcasting system is already here. So cosmic mind is already here. And all the 24 cosmic principles are already here. They're not something external to us that we have to go get. For this reason, if we are tuned into the cosmic mind, then and tuned into the other person, that's the other requirement, then you see we are now on the same frequency within this cosmic mind that gives many different kinds of broadcasts. So when Ramakrishna, for example, says the wind of God's grace, or divine grace is ever flowing, we just have to set the sail. Another way of saying, tune in to the broadcasting system that is already there. The grace of the broadcast is there, we tune into it. Now, supposing you have genetically similar or even genetically identical twins, they are naturally very close to each other. Therefore, it's not uncommon that they will think the same thoughts. They'll be on the same wavelength. Supposing my wavelength is continuously tuned in to the higher dimensions of the cosmic mind. Cosmic mind is your personal God. Tuned in continuously there, then maybe I won't be concerned with anything else going on. But when it's manifested within the individual context, we might say that frequency, if I am tuned into that frequency, then I'll get the same thought. Then I'll be able to determine what is the truth and what is not. So, yes, if I'm tuned into that person and tuned into the cosmic mind, the insight will be there. And we may see this as an internal access to what we call powers or siddhis. But there are different kinds of siddhis. 8 siddhis or so are mentioned in the 3rd section of Patanjali Yoga Sutras, a whole particular subject on siddhis. And it begins with dharana, begins with you should try to concentrate. So it's holding the mind onto some particular object. Now, there's no moral dimension to this. The object can be good, can be bad. Let us take, for example, Ravana. He was tuning into something, but he had high powers of concentration, and he had therefore high siddhis. But you see, he had self-centeredness, he had lust and greed and anger and all these things, these issues. It's absolutely no good, in fact, extremely harmful, if you have these various powers, because what are these powers? They are material things. So if you have all these powers and not the moral fiber to implement them for the greater good in a noble way, you'll use them against somebody. You'll exercise your power against somebody. You'll find people with tremendous powers of rhetoric, capturing the minds of everybody. And it's not a reflection of their fiber, their moral fiber, or their moral quality, not at all. They may be the most evil people on the planet with the most evil intentions. But you see, it's still Shakti. It's still a power that's within the person, expressing itself, either in a right way or a wrong way. So Ravana was a great meditator. So what is this subject, these powers? I have open in front of me Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And what we say is that we go on from dharana to dhyana and so on. Now this concentration, this meditation, and then this meditation to the point of one-pointedness, these three practiced together are called samya. That's the technical term for it. But it can be on any subject. So when a person can direct his mind to any particular object, fix it there nicely, and then keep it there for a long time, separating the object from the internal part, not because you have to understand that there are 3 worlds. There is the physical world and also the subtle impression world as well. We have to understand that this is not the physicist's world. Physicist's world, unfortunately, says everything is atoms. But you see, if I look at a rose flower which is red, the scientific explanation will be that certain photons enter into the retina, and there are cones and what have you that sort it all out and present an image internally, but actually it's all internal. There's no flower in front of me, but I can assure you, a flower is red and grass is green. That's our experience. Why should we deny it? So it makes no sense. But anyway, there is this internal perceptive aspect to us, which you cannot quantify, you cannot define. It is not made from atoms. A feeling of love is not made from atoms. A feeling of caring is not made from atoms. And any scientist that says, let's reduce everything to small, tiniest subatomic particles, will not deny the fact that when a baby is born in their family, they don't feel that these are just a bunch of atoms. They're fully connected with it. So there's this dichotomy. The atomic world, you cannot reduce everything to the atomic world. That's not our experience. It's not the truth. So there's this subtle dimension which is there that can be mobilized, but it's all connected. And then there's an intermediate world, if you like, which is the world of, we might say, the intellect. Now, this is Platonistic philosophy, Plato's philosophy, but it also happens to be the Vedanta philosophy, the yoga philosophy. All this Eastern philosophy will really be Plato's philosophy. That's all. And we have disrupted that completely from the 17th century in the Western world by Descartes. That seemed to bifurcate everything into this physical world and this impression world, and then hooked in with the ancient Greek idea, which was there, which was combated by Plato and so on. And so all of this was denied. This Democritus idea of atoms was denied in his own day, but then carried forward and unfortunately adopted from the 17th century onwards. And this adoption has been the heresy that was denied for some 2,000 years and odd. Anyway, why am I saying all of that? It's because, you see, when you mobilize these three worlds of matter, mind, spirit, then things look very different. And if you mobilize these fully controlled, this is called samyama. So you can direct your mind anywhere. When a man can direct his mind to any particular object and fix it there, and then keep it there for a long time. This is this threefold process. Now, and some examples are given. One is given here. I'll read it out, but you can go along with many others. See, by the conquest of that comes light of knowledge. That would be wonderful. Then you can have the internal. These three are more internal than those that precede. That is what we call samadhi, dhyana, karana. But you see, you can use these, unfortunately, and the effect can come out as miraculous things. So, for example, when you make this process, the samyam, on word, meaning and knowledge, these three things, which are ordinarily confused, because we combine these three things and endorse them as our reality. This comes the knowledge of all animal sounds. You can never mind about reading another person's mind. You can understand an animal's sounds. St. Francis did it. Apparently, St. Kevin did it, the saint of Glendalough. He had birds perching here and they spoke to each other very nicely. Because the explanation is, the word represents the external cause, the meaning represents the internal vibration that travels to the brain through the channels of the senses, conveying the external impression to the mind. And knowledge represents the reaction of the mind, with which comes perception. These three, confused, make our sense objects. But supposing you're able to separate them, supposing I hear a word, says the commentator Swami Vivekananda, there is first the external vibration, then the internal sensation carried to the mind by the organ of hearing, then the mind reacts, and I know the word. The word I know is a mixture of three things: vibration, sensation, and reaction. Now, ordinarily, these three are inseparable, but by practice, if you're inclined to do that, if you wake up in the morning and say, my dearest wish is to talk to all the animals and understand them, have a good conversation, then the yogi will practice the art of doing that, and he can separate these three things. And somebody who has attained to this, if he makes this samyam, then namely concentration, meditation, and super consciousness on this, on any sound, he understands the meaning which that sound was intended to express, whether it was made by a human or whether it was made by an animal. Now, of course, what use is all of that is another question that can be asked. Anyway, so past life can be recalled by this method. Signs on another person's body can be made as well. If you do it on the form of the body, the perceptibility of the form not being or being obstructed and the power of manifestation in the eye being separated, then you can create a sense of invisibility. And many people would like to be invisible, especially the number fives. Those who know the anagram will understand what I'm saying. You can just vanish. So like that, you can do that, and in terms of reading other people's thoughts as well. So if you want to read another person's thoughts, you can make a samyama on the necessary thing, on the necessary idea of a cosmic mind, and do that. But the counter question is equally valid. Why are you doing that? Supposing you were not a Jesus, but had all his powers. Supposing you could walk on water, that's another power which is there. Levitating is another power. I've seen people in certain organizations cross their legs on a mattress and jump, and they charge a lot of money for that, levitation courses and so on. But I suppose all you come up with is broken springs and bruised knees. So when you desire these powers, they are desires nonetheless. And our job in spiritual life is to remove all these desires from ourselves. We remove them all because these are the obstacles. This denies our view of the wholeness and fullness of what is there. And we're always future orientated. I desire this, I desire that. And future orientation, orientated around desire, very systematically brings us dissatisfaction and pain. So now we have to remove all our desires, except possibly one, which is to do with freedom or vision of God or something of that nature. Other than all of that, any desire orientated toward materialism. Materialism means taking the reality of the body, taking the reality of the mind, taking the reality of the relationship with the world. If we take all of that completely seriously and categorize it as real, and then pursue this is called desires. So how do we do away with it? Not by focusing on, can I read another person's mind? We do away with it by tuning into that cosmic mind that is distributed everywhere, not necessarily at a particular place. But you see, teachers may have this quality. You look at somebody, they say something, and you can pretty much determine. And that's useful for a teacher, no doubt. But it's not really the job of a saintly person to do this. Bearing in mind that whatever you do, whatever your behavior is, will have consequences for you. First of all, for your own body, first of all, for your mind, and secondly, for your mind, and beyond that. That is why that dictum is there, that truth alone triumphs, eventually triumphs. We shouldn't worry, therefore, whether something is difficult in the truth sense. Now, the subject of truth came up in a discussion, I can't remember where or when, and the discussion, I know where it was. The discussion was, we are told that Sri Ramakrishna, a highly developed master, and Vivekananda, a highly developed soul, but not necessarily of that same quality, have different aspects about truth. So sometimes the high ideal of truthfulness cannot be met fully. And so sometimes we have to debate what is more pragmatic. Would it be to be 100% truthful or 100% hurtful? Because the two can sometimes be conflicting. And so to live up to this highest perfection of truthfulness sometimes may be a little bit practically difficult. However, we should at least attempt to do the maximum, where what we think, what we say, and what we do are all lined up. And there's a very high ideal that Vivekananda acknowledged may not be fully pragmatic. And we find many instances in scripture of that kind of thing, particularly in the Mahabharata war. And so there is a military technique which is called Maya, a kind of magic. You deceive something. Great modern contemporary example of that in the last century would have been Pearl Harbor. So the ambassador, the Japanese ambassador, was talking nicely at the highest level in the United States. While he was doing that, with full knowledge of it, the Japanese Air Force was bombing Pearl Harbor. So deceiving on the one, you know how magicians do it. They'll misdirect your attention somewhere, and with the other hand, they're doing something else, so you don't notice it. Distraction is the very, very essence of illusion. Now it's the same in our own world. We are distracted. We're distracted by all kinds of things. Modern technology has given us a marvelous scientific way of communicating as we're doing now, but it is also available as a distraction. People walking down the road doing thumb exercises, as I call it. You sit in an airport or a train station, and there are not many people who are looking around, appreciating the flora, fauna, birds, etc., or people per se, or whatever it is. They're checking their emails on their telephones or their messages or what have you. We are completely internally occupied. And for that reason, keeping the mind occupied in this way distracts our attention, and fully applied attention is what is called concentration. And without that concentration, this first step of the samyam will be missing. So anyway, there's only one mind in summary, cosmic mind. Tuning into that frequency, either deliberately or accidentally, will result in us being on the same frequency, and close friends will naturally be on that frequency. Close relatives will naturally be on that frequency. You know, as one of the first immature questions I asked my philosophy teacher, said, "What is behind telepathy?" You know, patiently explained it, and he explained it in this sense of broadcasting, exactly as I'm presenting it to you. And I understood immediately, yes. Every so-called individual will be a kind of transistor radio, and there's a whole cosmic broadcasting corporation there, and we can tune in to a certain frequency, get on the same wavelength. Two people tuning in to the same frequency or the same wavelength will have the same thought. But if my attention is pitched elsewhere, either more profoundly and deeply, I won't catch it. Or if it's simply dismissed, it's not that important to me, then of course that won't happen. Or if I'm deeply concerned about the person and therefore choose to be on the same wavelength, then definitely we'll catch the same thought, no doubt about it. And that insight will be there. So by looking at a person, by gaining the insight of the person, we understand what they're thinking, how they're thinking, we can preempt that, and so on and so forth. Don't be surprised by it. It's a natural phenomenon. But it's also a divine phenomenon, of course. All right, so I hope we've covered that as comprehensively as I can manage. Okay, so that's a good question. Next question.
I actually have the same question. I still don't understand that these saints, which are at a very high frequency, they're tuned in.
Yeah.
And out of compassion, they can choose to see truth from deceit and insight.
Yeah.
Why don't they do it? Like, I think that question still kind of remains.
Maybe they do. How do we know?
Yeah.
We just don't know, you see. We know that the examples are there. We know how Ramakrishna looked at a person and immediately read them and understood them. And you see, if a person has a number of different flaws, behavioral flaws, I always say, you see, I have many flaws, but many ceilings too. So if you have these particular flaws, then a compassionate person will understand that immediately. And because all our flaws are built into our ignorance, and because our ignorance is really weakness, because weakness is painful, somebody will have compassion for a person. Our job is not to judge. Our job is to have compassion for the person. That's the point. All right. So, any more questions?
When we try to think about a topic, how do we think without having biases, conditioning, or how do we think freely, right? Without our past burden and all that. That was my first question. And second question, which is not related to the first question, is that when we read the works of Swamiji, what should we consider as still relevant? What do we think has changed over time? How do we make the difference out when we read Swamiji's works?
I can deal with the last one first. And from Swami Vivekananda's own words, whatever I teach you, which is true, does not come from me, it comes from my master. And whatever is untrue or difficult or inaccurate comes from me. So now we have to take that then, that what he's saying in terms of contained in the 4 yogas, the subjects of bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, and so on and so forth, is the principal essence of Swamiji's content. He's teaching these practical ways, but he's also teaching the principles, the Vedanta principles. All of this is true. Now, we notice that he shifts his position and tells us about the shift. He tells Sister Nivedita quite a few times. I used to think like this, now I'm thinking like this. But these are simply different approaches, and we can see in front of us the evolution of a deep thinker coming out, not fixing a position, doing it in a scientific way. And what we know about science is it's always changing. So we have a number of writings from Swami Vivekananda on lighter topics, comparing Eastern culture, Western culture, fashion, food, and so on and so forth, travel and so on. And this has nothing to do with spiritual realization. It has nothing to do with spiritual direction. So when we read Swami Vivekananda's works, and the 9 complete works are there, copious volumes are there, sometimes not as organized as we would like, then we see that the main topic of his conversation is in line with the inherent freedom of man, freedom of a person, and also the methodology of accessing it. And he fleshes this out beautifully, deeply, and always using the Upanishads as his basis. So that, of course, we should take seriously. And he has the benefit also of the experience of, in his words, the highest ideal of a perfect person, a perfect man, namely his master Ramakrishna. Now, it's his personal ideal, and he won't preach that personal ideal to others. He will talk about this ideal maybe to intimate people or in intimate conversations and so on. But in terms of educating people into the insights of the Vedanta philosophy to do with their own freedom, he does not mention the personality of his teacher. In our missionary endeavor, why should we mention this? Why should we preach this personality so great, so beyond the scope of our ideals, the ideal of ideals? That's what he found. But we might say, he's saying, I found it for myself, because he's saying my personal ideal. So we need to teach the philosophy of truth, which is connected with, which is to do with freedom. And then that sense of freedom should lead us to a truly free way of thinking. Now, it's very difficult to make a pronouncement or to have a belief system or a worldview that is not tainted by a bias. So your question is a very important question. So how do we get out of that? We get out of that by depersonalizing ourselves. In other words, we re-register the human body as a divine instrument, something like a car, and we re-register the mind as the sitting room of the Lord, not ours, not my mind, not my body, my mind. We take that away, and we register everything to the divine. If we do that, we find there's an inner creativity that opens up within us, where we are not influenced by what we thought as a child, or what our parents thought that were imposed on us, or what somebody else thought. We become a truly creative thinker. Now there's a technique to that, and that is to try to start off with a completely blank page. So the ancient rishis would have done that, taking nothing for granted except one fact: I exist. That we take provisionally. That's the truth, I exist. But does this world exist? Well, I'm not even bothered about that, you see. So there is something called scientism, which is equally biased system that everybody seems to have swallowed with adamant indoctrination, doctrinaire position. But Swami Vivekananda quite clearly puts doctrines, dogmas, and all of those kinds of things as secondary details. We should do the same. So supposing we sit down and look at our world around us and say, is this true? This is what the ancient sages did. It comes out as the Upanishads. They sat and said, let us examine the reality of the world. And since we can't examine the totality of it, let us take this body. And the only reason why we know about a world at all is because the senses report something. They report the presence of various forms and so on. But the fundamental question is, what is the nature of reality? And are these real? And what is the basis for determining what is real? What criteria will I use? Whether something is permanently existent or not. And two varieties of that are there. So, supposing an elephant suddenly appears in the room, let's make it a pink elephant just for creative sense, and disappears, we'll rub our eyes and question whether it was a reality or not. Things that appear and disappear, we should surely question whether they are reality. Then supposing the elephant comes and stays a while, but all of a sudden changes into a mouse. Then we'd rub our eyes again and question the reality of this. So what we're saying is, things which change, things which appear, things which disappear, cannot really be categorized into the realm of permanence. They have to be in the world of relative reality. This was all analyzed. And taking the body, therefore, the analysis was, what is the body made from? And can I observe it? And if I can observe it, then it must be an object. And that must be different from the one that is seeing it, because the permanent unit that I experience will be the thing that stands still versus the thing that has changed. So a relative perception will be there. And then what about, you see, the interpretation of what I see? It is said that nobody sees the same thing in the same way. We can compare terms. But then if we close the eyes, where space disappears, and only time exists in another realm, and then I have a realm of imagination. Instead of seeing an elephant with the physical eyes, I see the elephant when I close the eyes, and I know there's not enough room in my brain, in my head, for an elephant to fit. It must be something more virtual. So something gets reproduced. Is that real? Well, we can apply the same criteria. Things change. Now, I heard somebody say, my mind is purer than anybody else's. Why? Because I change it so often. Anyway, we see that change of mind, and we can observe. What did I think over the last few seconds? Not only thinking, but what did I feel over the last few seconds? People who went on the Enneagram workshop on the weekend were told, please observe, so-called yourself in compulsion, means observe what is coming into the field in your experience and your reactions, and seeing, am I connected with that? And if I'm not connected with that, and if it's a spontaneous way of behaving, then why should I behave like that? Can I not change it? And of course, all those biases come in as part of our habit. So if we want to look at things afresh, we also have to look at and eliminate the possibility of it coming from a habitual way of thinking. It is true that if you're brought up in a religion by your parents, then you probably hold those religious ideas in adulthood in some variety or another. You see, people think that Swami Vivekananda, for example, was an agnostic atheist and so on and so forth. Well, he was more a questioning person. But one of the things that he was concerned about from a very early age, and by the way, there's a book that you should probably read, which is derived from mainly Swami Vivekananda's letters to people. And there he relates a lot of interesting things about how he thought when he was a boy, what he experienced when he was a boy, how he came to Ramakrishna, and all of those kinds of things. Anyway, I'm locating the book at the moment, and the book is called Swami Vivekananda on Himself. It's a collection of writings on himself. Anyway, he gets concerned. He says, at the beginning of this century, that he's talking about the 19th century, it was almost feared that religion was at an end. Under the tremendous sledgehammer blows of scientific research, old superstitions were crumbling away like masses of porcelain. Those to whom religion meant only a bundle of creeds and meaningless ceremonials were in despair. Do you think things have changed? He says, they were at their wits' end. Everything was slipping between their fingers. For a time it seemed inevitable that the surging tide of agnosticism and materialism would sweep all before it. It may as well have been written now. When I was a boy, he says, this skepticism reached me, and it seemed for a time as if I must give up all hope of religion. But fortunately for me, I studied the Christian religion, the Mohammedan, the Buddhistic, and others, and what was my surprise to find that the same foundation principles taught by my religion were also taught by all religions. It appealed to me this way. What is the truth? I asked. He says, when I was a boy here in this city of Kolkata, I used to go from place to place in search of religion, and everywhere I asked the lecturer after hearing very big lectures, have you seen God? The man was taken aback at the idea of seeing God. And the only man who told me I have was Ramakrishna Paramahansa. And not only so, but he said, I will put you in the way of seeing him too. So we see that nothing really has changed in that way. But you see, thinking people will question. And the hard question of consciousness was something brought up by a man called David Chalmers, an Australian, a philosopher, kind of thinker, come scientist, come neuroscientist, I think. And he says, consciousness is the hard problem. But what he's talking about is the object of consciousness that we can see. We are self-conscious. We are conscious of the external world. We are conscious of objects, but they're not classified as objects. That's the problem. Then the next thing is, who is conscious of all of this? That question is not asked. That will lead you to subjective consciousness. And so the ancient sages would have done that. They would have gone through what is the nature of reality step by step, dismissed the body, dismissed the aggregate of the mind and all its functions, dismissed that intellect that would have analyzed these things. Because we see, I could change that. My opinion today is not what I do to have tomorrow, and my evaluation of things is not necessarily consistent. And maybe I make choices and maybe I don't. So there we find the criteria of change happening again. Appearance and disappearance and change. This is the criteria. Until you finally come to a datum, a point where you cannot go further, and you just, well, I'm the knower. There's a knower there that doesn't change. And if I observe that knower, I have to look for another knower, because that then has become an object. So there has to be some line drawn where I say, I cannot go any further. And then we have fulfilled this dictum, know thyself. So this oracle statement, know thyself, know thyself, know thyself, that is for really discovering people, thinking people, the criteria. Now, can you see this is unconventional thinking? That's what brings us into problems. We have a bias straight away which says I'm the body. We have a bias straight away that says I have a history. We have a bias straight away that says I have a personality. And I am that personality. We have a bias straight away that says this world is real and troublesome. We have a bias in addition to that of how we view people, how we view different racial groups, and increasingly how we have a tendency to group everything. For example, in contemporary times, we talk about the gay community. Now, a community has a structure, but we've using this term, not understanding there's no structure. What is the structure? What do we mean by a community? So we've coined these terms, and with these terms we have coined concepts, and with the concepts we've formed biases, and these biases will also change. We have a convincing speaker who tell us something different, convincing us enough to say, oh yeah, I changed my mind. I used to think like this, now I'm thinking like this. So that's the nature of nature itself. It is a changing landscape. So that is on Vivekananda. And yes, things do change when it's a commentary on the outside world. For example, you've just heard me quote Vivekananda. Using the word for religion, Mohammedanism, this is no longer used in this day and age. They say Muslims. And if you say Mohammedan, it's regarded as some kind of insult because it means it was a religion created, invented by a human. So terms change, languages change, meanings change, phrases change. There are no permanent domiciles. That all changes. The house you're living in will probably crumble in the next few hundred years, or maybe 1,000 years if you're lucky. The place you're living in the next 100 years will have a different occupant. the treasured memory, history that you have will all be forgotten in the next 100 years. Sorry, nobody will remember you. Who? Is it in the history books? Is it in a museum? No. Well, that's no meaning to me. That's why a permanent record of yourself may be a great advantage, something that is worthwhile, not a monument to somebody who went and conquered a land, destroyed it, and was called great. And then you make a monument, a brass monument or something. And then you get a group of people who say, no, this person was an oppressor. Let's put spray paint on it and take the thing down and throw it in a river somewhere. See, the values change, values shift. People debate today whether in the ancient days of the mainstream religions that are existent today, whether slavery was an accepted moral position. And it was. But you see, what do we mean by slaves? Was it domestic workers and so on? If that is the case, then there are many slaves throughout the world and living in less comfortable conditions and used, we call them employees, that's all. No doubt there was cruel slavery where, let us say, Vikings came in and took people by force. And we know Irish people did that. And that's why Patrick, who became Saint Patrick, was seized from his place, probably Wales, and forced on a boat into slavery for some considerable years until he managed to escape. But then when did all that change? Was it with Wilberforce that changed it? Was it because moral thinkers came in? The Christians abhorred it and so on and so forth, while maybe some Arabs were continuing doing the slave trade and so on and so forth. Was it a matter of conscience and so on? Those values change. Today, we think it is completely abhorrent. But in the ancient days of Rome and so on, it was commonplace. And if you were lucky, you earned your freedom. These moral values shift and change, there's no doubt. And with it, our biases change as well. Our attitude toward other people change, and other cultures and other people and places and events. And it will always change. It's a shifting landscape. But objective morality, that doesn't change because it is to do with purification of the mind. How do we purify the mind? So, one great method of purifying the mind will be the path of devotion. The great expert scripture on this is the Narada Bhakti Sutras. And before we broadcast this, a page was open at a random sutra, means basic thread. And it's going like this. It starts off with na tatsitao, for its success, satistao, same root as sita, a power. So that power, also used here for that success, in the path of devotion. When you have success, you have power over it. One should not discard the good dealings with others. Now, the implication of that is you should not take a superior attitude. I'm a devotee and the rest are not. If I say I am wise, it means the whole lot of you are foolish. It's a very arrogant position. And so we should maintain good relations with others, not immerse ourselves in devotion exclusively in the temple or the church or the shrine, but we are social beings. How do we deal with other beings is a good question. But renunciation of the fruits of actions as well as the means of their attainment should be maintained. Now, this is a text on Bhakti Yoga, but here we find a text on Karma Yoga. So, what should we do in our waking life? Should we avoid people, places, events? Should we be unsociable? Should we confine ourselves? Should we renounce the world? Now, what does renunciation means? This term renunciation is renunciation of parla, palat yagaha, renunciation of the fruits of actions, and renunciation also of the agency, the means of attaining them. These should be maintained. There was a previous aphorism about it, and in that it was stated that a bhakta, a devotee, need not care for Vedic injunctions or public opinion. Vedic injunctions means prescriptions for ritualism, and nor public opinion. Interesting. We are so fixed on public opinion. The question is, will this person behave in a manner which will be unrestricted and go about as he pleases? How will he behave in this world? So this sutra, says the commentary, therefore adds that right behavior in this world need not be shunned for the attainment of devotion. But then it has to be said that all one's actions are to be surrendered to God. This is what I term, I don't know if I coined it, but other people think I coined it, and maybe I myself think I coined it, and that is karma bhakti yoga. That is doing actions, whether I coined the term or not, that's the meaning. All your actions you surrender to the real author of the actions, the one that supplied all the energy for it, and naturally belongs to that entity. And so, should all be surrendered to God. Even in the atheistically orientated yoga philosophy, put it that way, tells us that Kriya Yoga consists at the end of it in surrendering the fruits of your action to God. So this is contained in the refined version of controls, the observances in the Eightfold Path that Patanjali lays out. Niyam, that is, surrendering your actions to Ishvara, to the Lord. That means the fruit of your actions, sorry, not your actions, but the fruits of your actions, the results, the effects. And so this sutra here adds that right behavior in this world need not be shunned for the attainment of devotion, but then it has to be said that all one's actions are to be surrendered to God. First, what is to be surrendered is the fruit of your actions, not the action itself. The devotee will have to go on just as other people go on, whether it's sweeping the street, whether it's walking, whether it's engaged in IT pursuits, whether it is working at a job in, let's say, an accountancy firm or a library or whatever it is, or as a Swami even, all of that is surrendered. All that fruit is surrendered. The devotee will have to go on, just as other people do. You cannot sit quietly and say, no, I'm too busy, or making offerings to God. Your very actions will be the offerings. He will have to act in the world, keeping steady his goal in view. His behavior should always be in keeping with the great ideal which he either has attained or is aspiring to attain. The idea is that whatever a person does, a devotee does, he does not for the sake of the attainment of certain objectives. That would be future orientation. Because I want to attain objectives, who? For me. So, whatever he does and so on for attaining something or achieving something, he should perform actions but should not have any desire for their fruits. This is a very important point. Becoming a man of God does not mean becoming a stock or stone. He should renounce the fruit of action, not the actions. He must carry on activities, but without attachment to the fruits. In the Gita, this is the third chapter would be the Gita, which is the fifth stanza, it will say, that nobody can live in this world renouncing all activities, even for a moment. That's not possible. Even breathing is an action. And you cannot stop breathing. Most people die from lack of breath. Life will not continue without that. In the same manner, all activities need not be eschewed, spat out. But we should not have any desire for the fruits of such activities. It's kind of repetition. Whenever repetition occurs in these commentaries, it's important. Not indulge in those activities as are motivated by the results thereof. Even sacrifices, religious sacrifices, are motivated by the results that are to be attained through performing them according to the scriptures, can be gone through without one's desire for the prescribed results. All these Vedic rituals are for the welfare of this life and the afterlife also. You do this to get that. And every religion will have it. You go and, I want to save my friend's life, what will I do? Well, we'll say so many decades of a rosary somewhere, or we'll offer semolina at the shrine at a specific deity that is dedicated to healing or something like that, to get a result. As it is said in the Gita, just as an ignorant man performs actions being attached to the fruits thereof, a man of God, a devotee, will do the same things without any attachment. And why does he do them? With the desire of doing good to the world. Is it a desire? Yes, it is. Even that's a desire. But not a selfish desire. Does not desire anything for himself thereby. That's true altruism. The idea is that he goes on doing things just as anybody does them, just as before, but his attitude, you see, has shifted. Doesn't want any result from it. To perform actions without any desire for their effects. Now, this has the spontaneous result, if you will, of efficiency. Because when you do one unit activity and concentrate the mind on one thing exclusively, it's impossible to have at the same time the wish or desire for the effect of what you're doing. In other words, you're engrossed in this current present moment. That is the way of removing any anxieties, any stress, which is all future orientated. What will happen if this happens? What will happen? And so on. Same thing with self-image. What will people think of me? And all of these kinds of ideas. They all go away when we take our orientation away from the future, which is results orientated, and put it into an appreciative moment, which is here and which is now. All right. Well, all right. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Om